You're sitting there. Someone just asked you something, and you already know your answer is no, but your mouth opens, and sure comes out. You've done this before, maybe 100 times, and every time you tell yourself, that's just who I am. I'm a caring person. But is that actually true? Because there's a difference between being kind and being unable to say no. And that second one, that's not kindness. That's fear. This video is for the person who says yes when they're exhausted, who stays when they want to leave, who apologizes for things that aren't even their fault. If any of that feels familiar, keep watching, because what I'm about to tell you might actually change something for you. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you said no and didn't feel guilty about it? Take a second. Think. For most people who can't say no, that memory is hard to find because saying no doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like a crime. Every time someone asks something of you, there's this split-second calculation. If I say no, what happens? Will they be upset? Will they think less of me? Will they leave? And so you say yes. Not because you want to, but because the fear of what a no might cost you feels too high. Here's the part no one talks about, though. It's not really about being nice. Your brain has been trained somewhere along the way to believe that saying no is dangerous. And you can see it everywhere in your life once you know what to look for. The extra shift you picked up because you felt bad saying no. The plan you agreed to that you never actually wanted. But you went anyway because canceling felt worse. The relationship where you kept giving and giving and the other person just kept taking. And you kept letting them. The text you responded to at 2 a.m. because you didn't want them to feel ignored. Even though you were exhausted. Even though it wasn't urgent. The apology you made when you did absolutely nothing wrong. You just felt bad that they were upset. So you said sorry. And honestly, this might be the one that hits hardest. The dreams and goals you put aside because someone else needed something. You keep giving yourself to everyone else's priorities. And meanwhile, yours collect dust. And here's what's wild. You probably don't even notice you're doing it half the time. It's automatic, reflexive, like breathing, but expensive. Someone asks, you comply. Someone needs, you give. Someone's upset, you fix it. Without ever stopping to ask, what do I actually need? But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't a flaw in your character. This is a pattern. And patterns have origins. Let me take you back. Not to some dramatic, traumatic event necessarily, just back. Because this pattern, it usually starts young. Really young. Maybe it was a household where conflict was dangerous, where saying no, even quietly, got you in trouble, or made someone you loved pull away, and so you learned, fast, that keeping the peace was safer, that agreement meant safety, that being easy to love meant being easy to manage, and your brain, clever, survival-focused, took notes. Agreement equals warmth, disagreement equals distance. So it made agreement the default. This is called the fawn response. It's not talked about enough. Most people know fight or flight, but fawn? That's when you pacify to survive. When the environment felt unsafe or unpredictable, you discovered that making others happy made things okay, even if it didn't actually make you okay. And the scary part? It worked for a while. So your brain kept doing it and kept doing it until it became who you thought you were. I'm just a people person. I just don't like conflict. I care about others. These aren't lies, but they might be half-truths. Because behind a lot of I'm just caring, there's I'm scared of what happens when I'm not. This isn't your fault. Let me say that clearly. This isn't your fault. You didn't choose to learn this. You were just trying to survive your environment. But here's the part where we have to get honest. What worked when you were small? Doesn't work the same way now, and it's costing you. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you send your own nervous system a message. My comfort doesn't matter. And after a while, your nervous system believes it. You start to lose the ability to even know what you want. Because you've spent so long reading what everyone else wants that your own wants feel almost foreign. What do you want to eat? I don't know. What do you want? Sound familiar? That's not indecision. That's erasure. You've been unconsciously outsourcing your preferences, your needs, your decisions to other people for so long that coming back to yourself feels overwhelming. And here's something that might surprise you. People pleasers are often incredibly perceptive. You've spent years reading rooms, tracking moods, anticipating needs. You're almost psychic about what other people feel. But there's a cost to that skill. You're using that radar to track everyone else, and you've turned it completely off when it comes to yourself. The people who love you, the real ones, they don't actually need you to say yes to everything. They need you to be real with them. But you don't quite believe that yet, because somewhere deep down there's still that old belief. If I start saying no, they'll leave. Let that sit for a second. Now I want to talk about what this is actually doing to your body and your mind. Because this isn't just a social habit, it's a full body pattern. Every time you say yes and feel that internal tension, that little clench of, I don't want to, but I'm doing it anyway, your nervous system registers that as stress, real physiological stress. That stress accumulates. Day after day, small yes after small yes, until one day your body is exhausted in a way you can't explain. You're tired, but not from doing too much, from being too untrue. Have you ever noticed that after a day of people-pleasing, you feel resentment? Not at them exactly, but to yourself, like you let yourself down. Again, that resentment is your body's way of keeping score. You said yes, but you meant no. And some part of you knows. And that part gets quieter and quieter every time you override it. Here's another thing that happens. You start attracting the wrong people. Not because you're broken, but because when you never push back, it sends a signal. People with high needs, low awareness, or selfish habits don't stay long around people with clear limits, but they thrive around people who never say no, and they tend to find each other. So by avoiding the discomfort of saying no, you've accidentally created a life where you have to keep saying yes, because the people around you expect it now. They were selected by it. And you might not even realize this, but part of you is exhausted not just by the yeses, but by the people the yeses have kept in your life. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. In your closest relationships, how many people actually know the real you? Not the agreeable version, the actual you. Because here's the thing about being a chronic yes person. You end up being liked by everyone, but known by no one. And that loneliness? It's a specific kind of lonely. You're connected to people, but through the version of you that performs, not through the version of you that's real. And somewhere in you, you know that, and it aches. There's also something called emotional debt. When you keep saying yes but feeling no, those suppressed no's accumulate. They don't disappear. And they come out eventually in random irritability, in emotional shutdown, in sudden explosions over something tiny that isn't actually about the tiny thing at all. Or sometimes it doesn't come out. It just turns inward. And you start to feel like something is wrong with you. Like you're fundamentally too much or not enough. That feeling, the something's wrong with me, is not the truth about who you are. It's the exhaust of a system running on the wrong fuel. And listen, I want to say this because it matters. The fact that you're watching this video means some part of you is tired of the pattern. Something in you is ready. Readiness doesn't mean you know how to change yet. It just means you've stopped pretending the pattern isn't there. And that's actually huge, because you cannot fix what you won't acknowledge. And for a long time, you might have been too good at minimizing it. I'm just helpful. It doesn't really bother me, but it does bother you. You're here. It does bother you. So let's talk about what's actually happening in your brain when someone makes a request and you feel that pressure to say yes. The moment someone asks you something, your brain does a rapid emotional cost calculation. And for you, the cost of no got miscalculated a long time ago. It got filed under catastrophic. So when you're faced with a request, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, fires. It says, saying no could damage this relationship. And that alarm feels real, even when it isn't. This is called an overactive threat response in social contexts. Your brain isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It's just using outdated data. That data is from whoever taught you that disagreement was dangerous. And your brain, beautiful, loyal brain, is still protecting you from a threat that may no longer exist. There's also something called the approval loop. Every time you say yes and someone responds warmly, your brain gets a hit of dopamine, small reward, good feeling, do it again. And every time you imagine saying no and imagine the worst response, your brain treats that imagined discomfort as real. It starts conditioning you against it. So you end up in this loop. Say yes, get warmth, reinforce yes. Imagine no, feel fear, avoid no, over and over, until saying no feels physiologically impossible. Here's the thing about validation loops, though. They feel like connection, but they're not connection. They're performance reviews. Real connection happens when someone sees the true version of you, limitations, wants, preferences, boundaries, the whole picture, and chooses to stay. But if you've never shown people the real version, you can't know who would have stayed. That's the trap. You preemptively self-erase to avoid rejection. And then you wonder why you feel unseen. There's also a concept called cognitive dissonance here. Part of you knows you want to say no. Another part says it's too dangerous. Those two things fight inside you constantly. And fighting is exhausting. And you might have noticed, the longer you hold a no inside, the bigger the anxiety around it gets, because unresolved internal conflict compounds. That's why, after years of people-pleasing, even a small decision can feel enormous. Can you cover for me this once? And your whole system just floods. But here's what I want you to hold. This is not a character flaw. This is a nervous system that learned the wrong lesson. And what is learned can be unlearned. So what does actually changing this look like? Because I want to be real with you. It's not a list of tips. It's not just say no more often. It's a whole different relationship with yourself. It starts with this: learning to notice the gap. The split second between the request and your automatic yes. That gap is tiny at first, but it's everything. Because inside that gap, if you pause long enough, you'll find your actual response. Not the performed one, the real one. It sounds simple, it's not. Because when you first start pausing, the anxiety is going to spike. Your nervous system is going to say, answer, say yes, make it safe. And you're going to have to sit with that for a second. Not forever, just long enough to hear yourself. That's the practice, sitting with the discomfort of the pause. Here's something else that helps. Neutral time-buying phrases, not lies, not full explanations. Just let me think about that and get back to you. That phrase does two things. One, it gives you the pause you need. Two, it teaches your nervous system that the delay doesn't cause collapse. And spoiler, it usually doesn't. Another thing that matters, learning what a no actually is. Because most people pleasers think a no is a rejection. It's not. A no is just information. When you tell someone no, you're giving them accurate information about your capacity. I don't have space for this right now. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. And the people who can handle that clarity, they're your people. The ones who can't might have been there for the yes version of you, not the real one. Here's something that might reframe this whole thing for you. Saying no to something you don't have space for is saying yes to something else. Your energy, your time, your mental health. Every no to someone else's agenda is a yes to your own. You've been saying yes to everyone's everything. What if you started saying yes to yours? This isn't about becoming cold. It's not about building walls. It's about deciding that your presence in someone's life should come from genuine choice, not fear. And when you give from that place, it means something. It actually lands differently because it's real. You can still be a generous person. You can still care deeply. You can still show up for people, just without losing yourself in the process. And you know what happens when you start doing this? When you start saying no where you mean no, the right relationships get stronger because they're real. And the relationships built only on your compliance, some of them will shift, some may fade, and that will feel like loss, but it won't be loss. It'll be clarity. The version of you that says yes to everything isn't more lovable. They're just more available. And available isn't the same as loved. So here's what I want to leave you with. The no you've been afraid of your whole life, it won't destroy your relationships. It will sort them. And the people who stay after the sorting, they're going to know who you actually are. And that is the only kind of connection worth keeping.